Hi, everybody. Brad Truax here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee, and today we're going to talk about invasive species. So, what are invasives? Invasives are species that are not native to New Hampshire, but have now become common here. There are invasive plants, invasive insects, invasive fish, and other aquatic uh, species, and many other invasive species. And invasive plants are of significance because they're capable of moving aggressively into any area and monopolizing the light, nutrients, water, and space to the detriment of our native species. Similarly, invasive insects may kill native species that don't have the sort of immunity that similar species had in whatever country the native insects originally came from. So, what are invasive plants? Non-native plants that become invasive because they don't have any natural predators here. They may have bugs, fungi, etc., that limited their spreads in their original continent, but those uh, original predators are not available here to limit their spread. So invasive species spread rapidly and can outcompete our native plants for sun, moisture, and soil nutrients. And most invasives can grow in sun or shade or in wet or dry soil. And most invasives are hard to control for several reasons, most important of which is they have extensive root systems that spread far and wide and are often very brittle. Trying to dig out the roots generally results in new plants appearing from scraps of the roots that broke off that further propagate the invasive species. And we may actually be part of the problem. Many invasive plants are sold by nurseries. One study identified 90 invasive plant species that were sold at more than 600 nurseries across the country. They found that over half the species taking root and spreading within areas within 13 miles of those nurseries. That's the median distance people in the US travel to buy landscaping plants. So before you go plant shopping, make sure you familiarize yourself with the species that are invasive to the areas and which plants are native species that are desirable for your area. So use a resource like UNH Extension's New Hampshire Native Trees, Shrubs, and Vines with Wildlife Value. And avoid plants that are advertised as self-sowing, low maintenance, or fast-growing because they're much more likely to be invasive species. So native plants are good for everybody. Native plants support wildlife because they've co-evolved with the birds and with the butterflies, bees, and other pollinators and kinds of wildlife that could easily coexist in the region. And strategies for eradication of invasive species usually include planting native plants to replace the invasive species. So, how do we identify invasives? Well, there are several apps available for your smartphones that can help you identify either invasive plants or native plants. And those include apps like iNaturalist, Seek, which comes from iNaturalist, PlantNet, PlantSnap, and LeafSnap, Picture This. And if you have an iPhone, it has an incredible visual lookup function that's extremely helpful. So again, this is showing the iPhone visual lookup. Your phone has this powerful tool that'll help you identify not only plants, but also insects, animals, and many other things. First of all, you take a photo, and then at the bottom of your photo, down here, you'll see this little eye surrounded by a circle and a plus sign. This is what it looks like. So press that, and Apple will tell you what it thinks you're seeing in that photo. This is really a good tool, and it's actually quite accurate. Before you attempt to remove any invasive plants, you need to understand how they propagate. Some propagate by spreading seeds. Others propagate via the rhizomes or the roots. And you may also need to understand the best time to intervene. You need to be aware that beware you don't inadvertently spread the invasives by what you do with the materials that you remove. So timing is important. Autumn is often the best time to intervene, and that's because many invasives keep their leaves green longer than the native plants, so it's easier to identify them in autumn. And in autumn, trees and shrubs begin directing their resources to their roots to store them for overwintering. And for some invasive plants that can't fully uproot, we often cut the stem close to the ground and then dab it with an herbicide. And the natural flow carries that herbicide along to their roots, further killing the roots and killing the invasive. Here at Eastman, we often do a group workday attacking glossy buckthorn in heath forest, and we do that in late September or October. Once again, it's easiest to identify the glossy buckthorn at that time of year. And again, that process for dabbing the stem close to the ground and allowing the herbicide to flow into the roots is very important. So invasive plants, the big three at Eastman are Phragmites, glossy buckthorn, and autumn olive. There are many other invasive species as well, but we'll talk primarily about the big three and a couple others. Phragmites, the reed Phragmites australis is probably the most frequent invasive plant in the entire United States. You'll often see it along highways, especially in power corridors, along shorelines, and many other places. And there are actually several stands of Phragmites here at Eastman. Again, the common reed, Phragmites australis, is a member of the grass family. And once again, it's probably the most frequent invasive plant in the United States. Again, you'll see it along the highways, particularly if you're driving along the New York State Thruway, you'll see a lot of it. You'll see it in power corridors and along shorelines. It's a perennial grass that can grow as high as 15 feet, and it's often found in dense clonal stands that are made up of both living stems and standing dead stems. The root growth below the ground is very extensive, with roots and rhizomes that can spread 10 feet or more and several feet deep in one growing season. And though some spread may occur via seeds, seed viability is relatively low for Phragmites. So the primary mode of spread is usually via the rhizomes or the roots. And this is showing where some Phragmites stands are here at Eastman. Probably the ones that are most readily visible for you are this one that's over here on Wellfield Road. And if you see that one, you'll actually see half of it has been treated with herbicides in the past by Woodlands and Wildlife, and the other half has not been treated. The second most visible stand is this one on Round the Lake Road, right at the corner of Trillium. And that was treated a couple years ago and required retreatment on a couple occasions. So why are Phragmites bad? Well, they suppress native species. They're often associated with reduced plant diversity, and they're associated with declines in habitat quality for either fish or wildlife, and they're disruptive to a number of biochemical cycles in the ecosystem. And they can also obstruct water flow if they're in narrow water channels. And there are aesthetic issues. When they grow tall enough, they can obstruct views. And they're very disruptive to recreational activities, particularly when they occur in water. And there's also potential fire risk from Phragmites. So do Phragmites do anything good? Well, the answer is we really don't know. There's very scant literature on this. Not everybody thinks that they're bad. They may actually be good for some wildlife or birds or insects. For instance, they may allow ways to escape from predators. They may be roosting sites. They may offer shelter from floods. And they also remove some metals from water. So again, others have actually used Phragmites for nesting materials, for lodges, and some have even used it for thatching roofs. And they do serve a waste treatment function. They may dewater some sewage sludge. And again, there's a full list in a paper that was written by Kiviat in Plants back in 2013. So Phragmites management, there are several strategies that have been used to eliminate or at least control Phragmites. And the important thing to remember is you may need to do these things multiple years in a row because the Phragmites can grow back. And you may also want to plant some native species once you've eliminated the Phragmites. So what are those strategies? Well, one is grazing. Not very practical here at Eastman, but some places have allowed sheep to graze in the areas. Physical techniques are mowing, cutting, burning, or excavating. But you have to remember that you got to get all the way down to the root system. So extensive excavating would probably be the most successful of these, but that's very expensive to do. And you can also cover the stubble once you've removed some of them with black plastic. We'll talk about our buckthorn baggies, which basically blot out the sunlight and other things that the root systems need to continue to function. And the most common one that's used are chemical herbicides. Glyphosate is the herbicide that's used most frequently, and that's the one that we've used here at Eastman for some of our bigger Phragmites stands. And hopefully there might be some biological strategies that could be used in the futures. Certain caterpillars of certain moths have been used experimentally and offer some promise. Okay, the second most common, they're actually probably the most common invasive species that we have here at Eastman is glossy buckthorn. It is one of the most invasive plants here at Eastman. It's very common on the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest. These can grow as high as 20 feet, but most are much smaller here. And the leaves are ovate and they have smooth borders. Don't have serrated edges. The stems are grayish with white lenticels. We'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And they have very characteristic red roots. And they're spread by the berries dropping to the ground and dispersal of seeds by birds and other wildlife. And in order to control it, we remove seedlings and saplings by hand, by actually pulling out the roots. But the larger ones we need to cut near the ground and treat the stump with an herbicide like glyphosate. And we also cover the cut stumps with dark plastic, what we call buckthorn baggies, which again cuts off the sunlight and helps kill the roots. So here's glossy buckthorn. The leaves often stay green in the fall after other plants have lost their leaves, so it's easier to identify them. And we time our glossy buckthorn poles here at Eastman to late September or early October for that reason. The leaves, once again, are ovate and they have smooth edges, no serrations. The stems are grayish and they have these white lenticels. The roots are very characteristic, very red roots. And the berries, again, it might have some nutritional value for birds, but generally less than many other berries. And these are buckthorn berries. Again, you may have seen some of these if you're hiking on the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest. Buckthorn baggies are made of fairly thick, very dark plastic. And when we can't pull a glossy buckthorn plant all the way out of the ground, we cut it close to the ground and cover the stump with these baggies. And they basically starve the remaining plant of sunlight and essential gases that it needs. So once again, every year, almost every year, Woodlands and Wildlife Committee has members and volunteers that do a glossy buckthorn pull on the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest. And we tend to do it in late September or early October because, again, that's when glossy buckthorn keeps their leaves longer than most other plants, so it's easier to identify them. And in this photo, Dave Wood and Mike Cronin from Woodlands and Wildlife Committee are using a weed wrench to dig up a 10-foot high glossy buckthorn plant. Probably the second most common invasive species at Eastman is autumn olive. And autumn olive is a very aggressive deciduous bush. It outcompetes and displaces native species. It can grow as high as 20 feet. And the leaves are bright green on top and have a distinctively silver underside. They tend to have spring blooming cream or yellow flowers that have a strong fragrance. And in the fall, they have abundant red berries that are lightly speckled and easily seen. And the flowers are arranged in spikes near the end of the stem, and they're small, numerous, and creamy white in color. I'll show you a picture of those in a minute. So the flowers are solitary, whitish, four-petaled, and they tend to bloom in mid-June. And the plant usually leaves out early in the spring when most other native vegetation is still dormant. So it's more easily identified in the early spring. So this is showing autumn olive. Again, the leaves are kind of a bright green on top, but a dull silvery color on the underside. And the flowers have four petals, okay, and they tend to be arranged in spikes near the end of the stem, and they're creamy white in color. They usually bloom in about mid-June. So once again, notice the difference in color here between the top of the leaf, which is bright green, and the bottom, which has this silvery color to it. And the creamy white flowers, again, tend to bloom in mid-June. And the bright red berries ripen in September to October. So this is showing how big the plant can grow. It can grow up to 20 by 20 feet, so pretty extensive. And again, the abundant berries come in the fall, and a single plant is said to make as much as 8 pounds of berries each year. And we're told that the berries make a delicious cobbler. We've never tried it, but that's what people say. So this is showing the berries. They're very bright red, and they have these little silver dots on them. And the berries do ripen in the fall, September to October. They're apparently very nutritious and delicious, and they have high content of vitamins A, E, C, and lycopene. So people make jams and syrup and cobbler out of them. So in terms of controlling autumn olive, cutting usually actually stimulates resprouting and can lead to thicker growth. So you have to be very careful. We usually would remove the saplings by hand, and larger shrubs could be mechanically removed using maybe a weed wrench, or cutting and applying herbicide to the stump, similar to what we do with the glossy buckthorn. Uh, One particular invasive species that's especially dangerous is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is a very hardy perennial plant that was originally imported to the U.S. as an ornamental plant. It's actually very pretty when it flowers. And though it's beautiful, it can wreak havoc. It has very deep and extensive rhizome system, underwater shoots, and they can grow up to 90 feet or more. So they're very extensive, and that makes it extremely difficult to eradicate. And it can lead to some serious damage to buildings and other structures. It has hollow, segmented stems that are very similar to bamboo, and it blooms in early fall with white blossoms that attract the bees and other pollinators. It's actually a very beautiful plant when it's flowering, but its small seeds can be carried by wind, water, or animals. And its primary mode of spread, though, is via its root system. Can Japanese knotweed grow through concrete? Well, it can't actually grow through concrete or stone, but it can grow through the cracks or seams in concrete or stone. And this is showing Japanese knotweed that's growing right up through these cracks in the concrete. So it's a threat to structures. It's been known to grow up through concrete floors, patios, etc. So control of Japanese knotweed is extremely difficult. They don't mow it because mowing can actually spread its growth. And continually cutting the canes and digging up the roots might be used for very small populations. But any cuttings that you do should be allowed to dry out in the sun before you dispose of them. And it should never be composted. Smothering with buckthorn baggies may be helpful. An application of the herbicide glyphosate usually needs to be repeated up to 3 to 5 years. Glyphosate is best applied just after the flowering until the time of the first frost. And our advice is don't try to do this yourself. You really need to hire a professional experienced with dealing with Japanese knotweed. It's an extremely difficult plant to control. Another invasive we just seen kind of for the first time at Eastman is Japanese stiltgrass. And stiltgrass has only recently been spotted here at Eastman. It's a weak-rooted, sprawling annual grass, and it can grow to heights as high as 6 feet, though it's usually much shorter. And stiltgrass is considered one of the most damaging invasive plant species in the United States. Infestations can impact the diversity of native species, reduce wildlife habitat, and disrupt some important ecosystem functions. And their favorite habitats for Japanese stiltgrass, which would be stream banks, floodplain forests, damp fields, ditches, roads and trail edges, and other shady areas that are prone to flooding. So it clearly needs some water in order to spread. Another invasive species we do have here is purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife is a perennial invasive, and it can grow up to 30 to 80 inches tall. And it's most often found in wetlands and aquatic systems. And it needs full to partial sun in order to spread. So it invades wetlands and suppresses native species and destroys some wildlife habitat there. Extensive, thick, woody roots create a dense web, and the seeds are dispersed by water, wildlife, and humans. And it might be confused with fireweed or lupine, which are purple native species, which are not invasive. Another possibly invasive species is Virginia creeper. Not everybody considers Virginia creeper to be invasive, and some feel that it's a native species. It can either be a ground cover or a climbing vine-like plant in the grape family. It's especially recognizable in fall when it turns red early, causing a very striking contrast with some of the other foliage. And in the fall, it has both red stems and blue berries. And the berries provide early autumn food for birds and other wildlife. But the berries can be very toxic to humans. Once again, it's a member of the grape family and is very common in eastern and central North America and southern Canada. It often appears as ground cover in woodlands, but can also be a climber. And it's rapidly growing, and it's considered invasive by many, but not invasive by others. This is showing that as a climbing vine, can also often be confused with poison ivy because it plants leaves look like poison ivy, but they're harmless to humans. But the berries are very toxic to humans. And this is showing the red branches and the blue berries that appear in fall. And the berries are popular for birds as a food in the fall. But once again, the berries are toxic to humans. In the fall, the leaves of Virginia creeper turn bright purple or red, before falling off the vines. And it's one of the earliest vines to assume that red or purple color in the fall. So it may show up as striking bright red when other leaves are still very green in the fall. Virginia creeper actually is a host to the eight-spotted forester moth and caterpillar. So it's a very colorful moth that looks like a butterfly, and its caterpillars feed on grape species, and particularly wild grape or Virginia creeper, which again is a member of the grape family. So the adult moths feed on nectar, so they're actually pollinators. Aquatic invasive species, there are several aquatic invasive species that can be a threat to our lake. Variable milfoil, European water milfoil, curly leaf pondweed, European naiad, water chestnut, fanwort, and before launching your boat, follow the clean, drain, and dry motto. We'll show you that in a minute. Eastman does have at its boat launch lake hosts that help ensure safe boat launching without spreading some of these invasive species. So again, you may have seen this sign, and this shows some of these invasive species. And you may have seen this sign in various places. It's often put out by New Hampshire lakes: clean, drain, and dry. And essentially, what that means is you need to clean all aspects of your watercraft or trailer or equipment before you launch in Eastman Lake or any of our Eastman water properties. You need to drain any water from boats or paddlecraft where it's not going to run back into the lake. And you need to dry your watercraft in the sun for at least 5 days, or if sooner than 5 days, you need to make sure that you rinse thoroughly and dry your boat or your watercraft before putting it into Eastman Lake. So once again, Eastman does have a boat wash that's adjacent to Eastman Road, just past the circle when you enter via the main entrance. And all watercraft that have been in other bodies of water should use this to rinse off before you're going to put your watercraft in Eastman Lake. And the boat wash has a hose for rinsing off boats, canoes, kayaks, paddle boards, etc. And it's important that you actually use this to avoid spreading invasive aquatic species that have been acquired in other lakes or streams before you put into any body of water here at Eastman. And we do have lake hosts. We have a lake host program. And a lake host at the South Cove boat launch will inspect your watercraft and help avoid bringing invasive species into our lake. This is showing milfoil. Milfoil is a submerged aquatic plant with fine, densely packed feather-like leaves that are whorled around a main stem, and it can grow up to 15 feet and exhibit 3 to 6 inch green spike-like flowers above the waterline in June or July. And it spreads by fragmentation or less likely by seeds. And it spreads rapidly and it displaces beneficial native plant life and often forms a monoculture of growth around the shallows of a water body. And it makes swimming very difficult, and it can devalue your waterfront property. In its native environment, insects and fish feed on this plant at such a rate as to control its growth. But in New Hampshire, variable milfoil has no abundance of natural predators to keep its population in check. And under optimum temperature, light, and nutrient conditions, milfoil may grow up to an inch per day. So this is showing milfoil. If we watch this video from nearby Grafton Pond, this is actually showing native milfoil, which is a good kind, but this is what extensive milfoil gardens would look like. Another invasive, aquatic invasive, is curly leaf pondweed. We haven't yet seen this at Eastman, but it was recently found and hopefully eradicated at Lake Sunapee. And it could be carried on boats or kayaks or canoes. So you need to make sure that you wash yours before launching in Eastman Lake. Okay, that's invasive plants. So now on to invasive insects. The biggest threats from invasive insects here at Eastman are emerald ash borer, beech leaf disease, and hemlock woolly adelgid. Also, the spongy moth, also previously known as the gypsy moth, is a threat here. So emerald ash borer is an invasive beetle. It originated in Asia, was probably brought over here in woody packing materials. It attacks true ash trees, white ash, black ash, green ash here in New Hampshire, blue ash, which is less common here. Note that it does not attack mountain ash because mountain ash is not a true ash tree. Once again, it was originally spread via wood brought for firewood, and it totally wipes out ash trees from forests and communities. Emerald ash borer has now been here at Eastman for several years, and our ash trees are beginning to show signs of damage and dying. So what's at risk? To put it in perspective, the Dutch elm disease, which occurred back in the 1980s, killed 75% of 77 million elm trees in the US. The chestnut blight killed 4 billion chestnut trees. Emerald ash borer has the chance of killing 8 billion ash trees. So again, it's a significant killer of our forests. So, why do we worry about emerald ash borer infested trees? Well, first of all, the trees become extremely brittle and they can break easily, so branches can fall. They can fall on people, pets, roads, property, utilities. But if they're out in the wood and they don't pose a danger to any of the above, we simply let them be. The branches of the trunk will just fall to the ground. And ash snags, which are standing dead trees, are actually attractive habitat for many species like cavity dwelling birds, mammals, and amphibians. Ash also happens to be a great firewood, but be very wary of moving ash because it can spread across state and provincial lines. So signs of emerald ash borer infested ash trees are blonding, and we'll show you pictures of these, feeding galleries, D-shaped exit holes, epicormic sprouts, and increased woodpecker activity and reduced canopies. So this is showing blonding. Here you can see this light discoloration, kind of a yellowish discoloration of the bark, more of blonding than ash trees. The galleries, feeding galleries, are these kind of S-shaped curvy galleries just underneath the bark. And this is where the larvae are actually feeding. And no other insect makes such looping galleries right under the bark in ash trees. This is showing exit holes, which have a D shape. This is a D on its side, and that's where the beetles eventually come out. Woodpeckers love EAB infested ash trees. So, an early sign of emerald ash borer infestation may be increased woodpecker activity. And the woodpeckers can sense the presence of EAB larvae underneath the bark. Epicormic sprouts or shoots are growths from buds that are underneath the bark of a branch, a tree, or trunk or stem of a tree that's been damaged. And signs of EAB damage include both the woodpecker holes and these epicormic sprouts. So the ash tree canopy thinning is a sign of emerald ash borer infestation. And there's actually a rating scale. Decline in the ash canopy goes anywhere from 1, which would be minimal or normal, all the way to almost total loss of the canopy. So again, there are several strategies that are used to deal with emerald ash borer infested trees. If they're out in the woods or in the forest and they don't pose a danger to any of the above, we just let them be, and they'll fall down. If they pose a threat to people or property, on the other hand, there are two strategies. You either have them removed or you have them treated with insecticides. And if they're of value, either because of their beauty or the shade that they provide, you can have them treated with insecticides every 2 to 3 years. And maybe someday we'll have a biological solution that will save the ash trees. So that's another reason that you might want to save your valuable ash trees by treating with insecticides every 2 to 3 years. Another threat, which hasn't arrived yet in Eastman, is the hemlock woolly adelgid, but it's very likely to appear sometime in the near future because it's been seen in other parts of New Hampshire. The woolly adelgid is a wingless insect and it affects eastern hemlock trees. Remember, eastern hemlock is actually the most common conifer that we have here at Eastman. And it's a tiny insect and it feeds on the sap of the hemlocks. It inserts its straw-like mouth part into the base of the hemlock needles and steals valuable nutrients from the needles and causes the needles to fall off. And the adelgids cover themselves in a white cottony substance for protection, and that makes them easy to identify. I'll show you a photo of them in a minute. The hemlocks don't die immediately, but they eventually die off as the infestation worsens. This is showing the hemlock woolly adelgid. Uh, Again, they don't die immediately, but will eventually die. And once again, the adelgids cover themselves with this white cottony substance. It protects the adelgid, but it makes identification of the infestation quite easy. Another invasive that is about to arrive here is beech leaf disease. Now, this is different than beech bark disease. Uh, this is caused by a small nematode, which is a roundworm. And it was first noted in Ohio back in 2012. It probably originated from Japan. It was probably brought here in some ornamental plants. The beech trees in Japan are not affected by it because they've co-evolved with the roundworm. And in highly infested areas, this disease can kill up to 90% of young beech trees in a period of 2 to 5 years. So it really has been spreading at an almost unprecedented rate. And this tiny worm can be blown into little aerosolized droplets that can be carried on the feet of birds or blown in very windy days. And it's a real threat to our forests. Beech nuts, again, are a rich source of food for over 40 wildlife species, particularly bears. So if beech leaf disease destroys beech trees, we're going to see a dearth of beech nuts, and the impact will be very great on wildlife. So once again, it's caused by an invasive nematode, a roundworm, and it causes the dark banding in the beech leaves. So you can see this. And then as the disease progresses, the leaves take on kind of a leathery appearance, and the dark banding that can actually turn into yellow banding. And this is holding up a beech leaf, and this is actually showing the nematode or the roundworm inside that beech leaf. So again, beech leaf disease is a real threat not only to the forest, but especially to our wildlife. And that's because, as I mentioned, beech leaves are such a rich source of food for over 40 wildlife species. They're a nutrient-dense food source for bears, white-tailed deer, turkey, wild ruffed grouse, wood ducks, woodpeckers, and more than a dozen other species of mammals and birds. And researchers are looking into ways to combat this disease. Potassium phosphate is a good treatment to protect the beech leaves, but it's not economically possible to treat every beech tree. And aspirin and methyl salicylate, which is found in wintergreen, are showing some promise. And European beech trees may be a good alternative one day to replace the nut production that's lost when the American beech trees die. Pretty much the last one we'll talk about is the spongy moth. The spongy moth used to be known as the gypsy moth, and it's a very invasive species that has no natural predators here in North America. And it was imported into the U.S. over 100 years ago for possible silk production. And its caterpillar really causes devastating defoliation of forests here in New England. The spongy moth prefers oak, willow, apple, crabapple, white birch, witch hazel, mountain ash, basswood, lime, linden, pine, and Douglas fir and spruce trees. But they will also feed on hardwoods, maple, cherry, hickory, and hemlock, and a number of other species. So really a threat to multiple species here in New England. And the fungus, a certain fungus, has been helping keep the smudgy moths in check and offer some hope for the future. And hopefully, a parasitic wasp might be the ultimate solution to the spongy moth problem. This is showing the spongy moth, the caterpillar up top, and this is showing the devastation that it can cause to some forests here in New England. And the spongy moth larvae here are seen really destroying the leaves on an oak tree. You might also recognize, even if you don't see the spongy moth or the spongy moth caterpillars, you may see its droppings. So these droppings we've actually seen in several spots here at Eastman. And the spongy moth egg masses can form on the trunk of an oak tree. So they're very extensive. So oak is a preferred food source for the spongy moth, and even light defoliation of oaks could substantially reduce acorn production. And you know from our previous presentations on hard mast that acorns are one of the most important food sources for wildlife here at Eastman and the Upper Valley. So in turn, that could have a negative impact on New Hampshire's woodland wildlife because so many birds and mammals actually depend on the acorns. And in turn, that could affect us here at Eastman because without the hard mast in the forest, the bears come looking for food sources near the humans. We've seen in years when both acorns and beech nuts have been scarce, the bears have come looking for food here at Eastman. So they've been out at your bird feeders, looking in your garage and other places for food. And in turn, when we have a good mast year, when there are lots of acorns and beech nuts out in the forest, bear interactions with humans tend to be less frequent. So the lack of acorn production would also delay the natural regeneration of oak seedlings. So in terms of invasive insects, there are other ones that we're watching out for. Spotted lanternfly, the brown-tailed moth, jumping worms, Asian longhorn beetle. And there are also aquatic invasives, which we don't have here, but some of the species that you've heard about are zebra mussels and the Asian carp. So if you want to learn about invasive plants in New Hampshire, you can go to the UNH extension site, which has some good resources. And you can learn about invasive insects in New Hampshire at www.nhbugs.org. And if you want to learn about your invasive plants, go to UNH Extension's site that really has some good resources on identifying native plants. So that's a little bit about invasives at Eastman. Hope you've gotten something out of this.